Daily Dog podcast for Tuesday, September 2nd. This is Game Week 2 as we build towards the game in Sanford Stadium on September 6th, this coming Saturday against Austin Peay, the Governors. But before we get to that, we are wrapping up our look back from last week, Game Week 1. Yesterday, we kind of broke down the numbers, went through the offense, the defense, and we took a look at where we stood compared to the goals and the ideas that we set out, what we wanted to see from Georgia when they were playing yesterday or on Saturday. We knew they were going to win the game. We knew that Marshall was an overmatched opponent. So what we wanted to see were certain sort of check marks and progress goals about how Georgia played on offense and defense, things we were looking for that would make market improvements towards next year and give us a sense of how this team is developing as a potential SEC and national championship contender. So today what we want to do, we broke that down yesterday. Today what we want to do is take a look at everybody else, take a look at how what happened on Saturday fits into the big scheme of things. We'll do this week by week, so it's early. It's just week 1. So you'll see a bunch of articles out there in the national media. A lot of people put together what they call their early overreactions. College football is oddly self-aware now in both its media and its fan base, that when we see something happen each week, game to game, week to week, we look at it and we tend to overreact. So what are the overreactions? Oh no, Arch Manning is terrible. The overreaction before the preseason overreaction is Arch Manning is the Heisman Trophy winner and the #1 pick. So Texas is #1. Oh no, Texas has got all kinds of problems. So say, these are the overreactions that we see out there. Georgia kind of flies under the radar for those first couple weeks in terms of significant overreactions, unless we really did something terrible, because we're just not playing anybody that is going to cause people to spend a lot of time thinking about it. But as Georgia fans, we spend a lot of time thinking about it. That's why we're here. We want to take a look at and just have a good idea of where things are going week by week. So now what we need to do is take a look and say, well, what does it mean? We won 45-7. We beat Marshall, an overmatched team. We were the #5 team in the country coming in. We're probably going to be around the #5 or maybe the #4 team coming out. I had delayed this broadcast or this podcast, was hoping that the rankings would be out by now. I misspoke yesterday when I said we would have the rankings for sure overnight. I completely forgotten about Bill Belichick's debut at North Carolina, which was getting the holidays, Labor Day, Monday night treatment. And because I'd forgotten about that, I was expecting rankings, but we don't have them yet. I've been kind of delaying today, looking to see if those rankings would pop out and thinking they had a lot of time to put everything together and they could get them out earlier in the day. But so far, no joy. So we'll move on without them. In fact, one of the exercises I did to get ready, create notes for today's show, was to take a look at and do my own top 10. And I got a few comments about that too, just as I get into it. But I suspect that what will happen when the rankings come out is Georgia will either hold at #5 or maybe move up to #4. So let's take a look at what the rankings were coming into the week. #1, Texas. #2, Penn State. #3, Ohio State. 4, Clemson. 5, Georgia. 6, Notre Dame. 7, Oregon. 8, Alabama. 9, LSU. And 10, Miami. So that was your top 10 coming into the week. So obviously we're going to have some change and some shakeup. The question is exactly what's it going to be? And this is always an interesting week. From week 1 to week 2, you often see the pollsters jump things around quite a bit. Some of them feel a little bit burned, I think, when a team like Texas goes out and lays an egg like they did. Or Clemson. A lot of people were high on Clemson. They had 4 first-place votes. They were ranked #4 in the AP poll. A lot of people thought this is an experienced team with a veteran quarterback, a good defense. Maybe this is the year they put it together. They go out at home and they lose to LSU. Some people might feel burned and punish them for that. But then there's also the question of, well, how far does a team fall for losing? If you're Texas, you're #1, you go play #3 in the defending national champions on the road in their home. How far should you fall for losing a game by 1 possession? So a lot of questions there. Leaves some question about how far a team like Georgia can move up. But either way, we didn't attract a lot of attention. You didn't have a lot of people watching what Georgia was doing. And essentially what they saw, if they checked the scores, if they watched any of the game, was they saw basically what they expected. They saw that we racked up a bunch of yardage, we scored a bunch of touchdowns, and we beat an overmatched team. And so the expectation was there. So again, Texas Texas, Penn State, Ohio State, Clemson, and Georgia. Those were your top five. So what is likely to happen? Well, there's both what I think should happen and what's likely to happen. There's a lot of buzz out there about Ohio State, since they beat number one, jumping up to number one. That'll probably happen. Penn State probably holds at number two. LSU probably jumps all the way up to number three off of their showing, and then we slide up one spot to number four. And then I think Miami, after beating Notre Dame, would also jump all the way up from down at number 10, probably up to number five. And then you start to slot in the losers from the weekend because, the perception is until they do it worse than just lose one game. And let's face it, all these teams lost to other top 10 teams. So it's not exactly like Alabama, where they laid an egg, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But all the teams we're discussing right now, where to put them, they're teams that lost to top ranked teams. So where should they be? Texas probably slots in at number six, Clemson at number seven, Notre Dame at number eight. Then it starts to get a little fuzzy about exactly what happens after that. 11 was Arizona State, 12 Illinois, 13 South Carolina, 14 Michigan, 15 Florida. Those were your next five out of the top 10. So South Carolina was on a high profile game on national TV against Virginia Tech, probably not a great opponent, but not a Marshall. And so they might get some credit for that. They may jump up into the top 10. I wouldn't be surprised to see them come in at number nine. And then I think what you'll also see is, even though you have Arizona State, Illinois, Michigan, Florida, you got other teams that, played overmatched teams and did what they were supposed to do. I think the team that probably got the most attention next is probably FSU. And FSU had been a title contender 2 years ago. Then last year they laid a huge egg all season long, go 2-10, and so the question was, well, what are they going to be this year? Do they mount a comeback, or are they dead in the water? And I think most people probably figured they would mount a comeback, but maybe it's like an 8-4, 9-3 kind of regular season, and see where that gets them. Well, they went out and they destroyed Alabama, and we'll talk about Alabama later. What's the real expectations there? But I think they got a lot of attention for that game, and people are going to want to see a challenger in the ACC. Clemson all of a sudden now starting out with a loss, maybe still the best team in the ACC. Miami beat Notre Dame, so now maybe they're the best team in the ACC. People want to see some other teams to put up there, so I think you're going to see a lot of love for FSU, and I wouldn't be surprised if they jump from all the way outside the poll all the way up to the number 10 slot. So that's what I think is likely to happen. Is Ohio State, Penn State, LSU, Georgia, Miami, Texas, Clemson, Notre Dame, South Carolina, and FSU would be your new top 10. What I think should happen, just to be clear, is I actually think that Penn State should probably move up. Much like us, they played an overmatched team at home. They won fairly handily, but didn't exactly blow the doors off anything. They just did what they were supposed to do. But coming into the season, I would have argued that maybe Penn State was a team, and I sort of alluded to this on previous podcasts, that should be getting more love than Ohio State. Penn State brings back both their running backs from last year, their quarterback from last year. They might have a better receiving core, although they lost the big tight end that was very dynamic for them last year. They still have a good defense. They brought Ohio State's defensive coordinator over. So they look to have everything they need to be a veteran top team, like we talked about. With the trend in football right now, they look like that team that has gone all in on bringing everybody back and trying to use some NIL money and other things to keep the top guys on hand, and they have. So they got a lot of experience, they got talent, and they look a lot like a team that has won the national championship each of the last 2 years. So they were sitting at number two, and maybe they should have been number one all along. I mean, I don't think that Ohio State dominated Texas in the game as much as neither of them were very good offensive teams. And I think both defenses are definitely good. I think they're really solid, and there's a lot to like and respect about it. I think both these teams, Texas and Ohio State, are going to have really good seasons. They're going to be in the playoffs, and they're going to make some noise. And that's one of the things that's, if you like the playoff format, or whether you like it or not, I guess, one of the things that you can say is good about it is I don't know if it really opens the door for more teams to be in the playoff. I guess it does. I guess I have to say it does. Indiana, Arizona State, a couple teams you never would have seen in a playoff before without expanding it. Boise State, even though Boise State has been to a New Year's Day Bowl famously before, but I guess we did say you have to, yes, it expanded. The question is, can they win or be a force? And I don't know if that's true, but I will say that coaches have always talked about how by the time you get to the end of a 12-game season, you played some tough teams, you get towards that what used to just be the one bowl game at the end of the year. Guys that were rookie performers, freshmen, sophomore, red shirts, these guys are veterans now. Guys that didn't used to start, that have been starting and playing, they've put in a lot of snaps and they're basically veterans now going forward. And that's one thing that's going to continue to be different is now you have college football used to not leave you much room for development. You needed to, if you wanted to control your destiny in college football, you need to go undefeated for most of my lifetime. And in recent years, with the expanded playoff, meaning instead of just the bowl games or the BCS game, the one BCS game, with a 14 playoff, there was room to see a really top team maybe have two losses and still win a championship, but it was still seemed mostly unlikely to be in that top four in that regard. So in the modern era, we've still looked at undefeated or one-loss teams as the teams that are controlling their destiny, and they needed to make statements throughout the season. They when you played a cupcake team and you didn't do well, or if you played a mid-level conference team and you didn't perform well, let's say you played against old Indiana, not ranked, you're Ohio State, and you played against Indiana of old, who was going to go 2-10 on the season, and you had to eke out a win in overtime and a field goal. Everybody was looking, and that counted against you as to how we think about you when we put you in either that BCS game, that bowl game, or into that 14 playoff. Even if you'd won the game, it's going to matter. Well, nowadays, sure, it's still going to matter. We're going to look at it, but there's just so much more room when you have 12 teams and maybe in the future 16 teams getting into that tournament. There's a lot more room to make a case about who's among those best teams in the country. And but here's the other thing there's room for. There's now room to develop your team. There's now room to work on getting better week in and week out, building that veteran experience out of a bunch of new starters so that by the time you get to the end of the year, a playoff, you can make a run. And I don't think that Ohio State last year made a case for that. That was not them. They were an elite, talented team that brought back a lot of veterans and went all in on last year. They stumbled during the regular season. They lost two games and they didn't even make their conference championship. We talked about that before. And their fan base was down on them. And by the time the first playoff game rolled around, where they have a home game in freezing cold weather and Tennessee's coming up there, Tennessee fans went en masse up to Ohio State expecting to go up there and beat Ohio State. They thought they were kicking a down dog basically, and they were going to go in there and just have a lot of fun and party on their way to a first round playoff victory. Against all odds, Ohio State, having lost four in a row to Michigan, failing to win the Big Ten or even play for the Big Ten championship, uh, picked themselves up and made a run. And they made an elite, really high level run through the playoffs. They deserved to win the championship. But they had lost two games in the regular season. They weren't their conference champion. So again, I think the point I'm getting at there is to say, look, this was not a team that was developing. They had the talent and the capability, but maybe what they developed was not talent. Maybe it wasn't veteran play. Maybe it wasn't getting guys reps who didn't have experience. They had all that already. Maybe what they finally developed was a backbone and some resiliency and a will to say, God, dang it, we're going to win. We have nearly blown our chance, but we're in the playoff and we're going to do it. And they did. They buckled down and they won. So, I don't want to oversing the praises of Ohio State. I'm certainly not an Ohio State fan, but give credit where credit's due. That's what happened last year. So the point as we look at what we're talking about today is how is Georgia developing? How are the other teams around us developing? What is their potential? Not just what are they today after week one. And the old version of college football, you kind of had to look at that. Every week was going to count significantly against you. And if you stumbled and you lost, you may be out of the race. And so, wonderful development down the road maybe wasn't going to matter. And as Georgia fans, I think we know there are several times we could look back at teams of ours that was probably true. Teams that were playing some of their best ball, towards the end of the season. That was certainly the case in the 2007 season, which led to, I talked recently about, reminded everybody about the horrific 2008, where we started as, on the cover of Sports Illustrated as the preseason number one team in the country and immediately began losing credibility with weak performances until we got hammered at home by number 8 Alabama, having already fallen from 1 to 3 without even losing a game. Just our performance was so poor that we lost ground in the polls. So that proved to be a disaster, a raising of expectations that fell completely flat and just sort of embarrassed us in the national media for that time period. But so we know that sense of it, but where did that come from? How did that happen? Why did I bring that up again? Because the 2007 season was a situation where Georgia had lost 2 games during the regular season, but down the stretch of the season, maybe had become one of the best teams, if not the best team in college football. Closed the 2007 season incredibly strong, and was making a pitch, and that was the argument when it came down to who's going to get into that infamous BCS game, who's going to have a shot to get into the right bowl game. Georgia, Mark, I remember Mark Rick being on TV, and we had our case out there, and LSU, got the nod, and we didn't. But that's what I'm talking about is we overcame mistakes that year, and we built a lot of credibility. And that team, the 2007 team, ended the season as a really dynamic, impressive team. And the reward for that was being put at number one for the next season when we brought back so many people. That's why I was alluding to that. In the end, none of that worked out. 2017 wasn't the same as the 2008 team. The 2008 team lost whatever that building, that dynamicism was when the next year started. But so as we're looking at these teams, not just Georgia, and we're talking about these top 10 teams, we're looking at them and saying, hey, all of these teams have the chance to build throughout the season, get into the play. It's the same thing you hear in pro sports now. Just get in the game, get in the tournament, get in the playoff, and then you got a chance. That's why I alluded to Ohio State. They weren't a team that needed to develop so much last year. They were a team that needed to overcome themselves, but they just got in. And then they absolved all their sins by stomping through the playoffs and winning the national championship because they made it in at least. So what we're trying to do is put some context on where we stand right now, 1 game into the season. And we can't just look at ourselves in a vacuum. That's why we're talking about the other teams. This is a contextual argument. It's going to matter what the other teams do, whether or not you're worthy of one of the 10 or 12 slots, or the 12 slots. It's not 10 or 12. One of the 12 slots out there is going to depend entirely on what the other teams do, and that's one thing where college football today still looks like college football of old. If you go undefeated and win your conference, if you're in the SEC or the Big Ten, maybe even the ACC and the Big 12, but definitely the SEC and the Big Ten, if you go undefeated and win your conference, win the conference championship, you're going to be in the playoff. You're going to control your destiny. So you can still control your destiny, but at least as far as getting into the playoff and getting the best seeding situation you can. But if you end up taking a loss, maybe 2 losses, maybe even 3 losses, then context is going to mean everything. Who are those losses to? How did you play in the rest of the season? How are they going to judge the committee? How's the playoff committee going to judge your overall performance? And what are the other teams you're being compared against? Because that's not going to your comparison is not going to live on its own. It's going to depend on what those other teams did. So getting back to what's going to happen. We don't have the rankings out yet, but like I said, I suspect Ohio State will take number one, but I think Penn State should take number one. I think they will bring LSU all the way up to number 3. They'll leapfrog over us. So, those of you who are excited and looking at it and saying, hey, all these guys lost, we could jump up to number 3. Probably not. We might not even move up at all. I wouldn't be surprised if they moved up other teams or moved down. If Texas, I wouldn't even be totally surprised if Texas only fell from number 1 to number 4 and still kept us down at number 5. But I think the right move, and I think the most likely, is going to be Ohio State, Penn State, LSU, Georgia, Miami, Texas, Clemson, Notre Dame, South Carolina, and FSU. That's what I think we'll see. So I would have preferred we had the actual rankings to take a look at there, but we'll see. So what is the national media saying about Georgia? What have we seen on the SEC network, the national media, the sports writers? Basically what we expected, what we talked about last week, and What's not terribly surprising based on the game we played. We did what we're supposed to do. We didn't hurt ourselves. We didn't really help ourselves. We couldn't have really helped ourselves. There's almost nothing we could have done to change the perception. We're already ranked number fifth. We have one first place vote, like we talked about last week. What that means is people are saying, "Hey, that's a super talented team that certainly got the talent to be a contender." Most everybody keeps listing us as the fifth seed, so right behind the four top seeds. So they're expecting us to fall just short of winning the conference and being one of the top four teams, but be the next guys up in that next wave at the large bids. So nothing about what happened this last weekend is going to change that, both nationally with the other teams and with what we did. Whether we move up to number three or four, even if that was an option, that's not going to really change that much about where people perceive us. And the continued answer is at the moment, people say, look, this team's going to be in the playoff because of their just overall talent. But nobody projects us all the way to winning it. They don't see us as that team that's got that combination of things to win. And that's why we broke down and dug into Gunnar Stockton, compared him to Arj before the game, and talked about how that comparison held up after the game. We talked about it yesterday. Is a lot of what people think about how far Georgia can go is going to depend on whether or not they think Gunnar Stockton is a guy who can lead you to a title. So now maybe what they think doesn't matter very much because they had already had Arch Manning fitted for the Heisman Trophy. They probably should have just penciled it or gone ahead and put it on the plaque and just had it already based on the way the preseason went. And look, he may rebound and completely be a guy who's still in that Heisman race before it's all over. It's hard to overcome a performance with everybody looking like what happened on Saturday and win a Heisman, but he's got the opportunities. He has the schedule. He's going to have the opportunities. He could win an SEC championship. He could beat us. He could dominate the rest of the season. He could get another crack at Ohio State in the playoffs and dominate them. And if all that came together, although the Heisman will probably be out, I guess, before the playoffs, but you get the idea. He could rebound significantly. So, um, long story short, contextually speaking, there's nothing we did that's going to change how people feel about us right now. And there's nothing that we can expect really in the next week or two, not until we play some better teams, even though the other teams around us lost. They're still in the running. The teams that won those games are even more up in the running. So it's just a little bit of reshuffling the order. But for the most part, people are still looking at us in the same place, and they're going to keep thinking of us in the same place until something changes the needle. That may be the Tennessee game. We'll have to see how Tennessee had a good opener. People feel encouraged because nobody knew what to think of Tennessee. They were down in the ranked 24th coming into the season. But Joey Aguilar, the transfer where they swapped quarterbacks with UCLA, with Nico and Joey, he looked good. He ran the offense well. They put up a lot of yards. They put up a lot of points. They won, by double digits against a team with some credibility in Syracuse. And Fran Brown, who used to coach at Georgia, kind of rooting for Fran. Fran is doing a great job with Syracuse. He had a great team last year, but he lost. He assembled a good quarterback out of the portal and some other pieces, and he had some veteran guys, and he put it all together, and they won 10 games last year. This year, Syracuse team is probably not going to be that good. They're probably more like a 6-6 team with good coaching, maybe 7-5. But and that's just because of what they lost and where they're going to have to build back to. They're just not ready to be there. But nonetheless, Tennessee beat them and beat them handily. Probably gave up a little more yardage, showing that excellent Tennessee defense from last year is not what it's going to be this year, and that may be a big crack in their armor. So if their offense continues to work as expected, they may have gone back to where they used to be, which is a team that can put up a lot of offense but leaves a lot to be desired on defense. It's maybe too early to say a lot to be desired, but it could be an issue. So we'll take a look at that and see. But that's our first real chance to make a dent in the discussion. So the Tennessee game in 2 weeks will be really our first chance to make any real impression with the national media. And frankly, and for us as fans, will be our first real chance to see us play a team, that's more on our level or close to on our level, supposed to be on our level. I mean, it's a conference team and a team that's talented, probably on a talent index. Tennessee is not really quite as talented as Georgia. So you would just look on talent alone and say Georgia has an edge or an advantage, but it will be on the road. Tennessee's very tough at home, and so far they're getting off to a good start. So that'll be the first real chance to move the needle. Um, while some breaking news, while we're on or while we're recording, we're not exactly on the air, but while we're recording here, the new AP poll was finally just released. So I can go back and speak to a couple things about that. I gave you what I thought my predictions would be, and I'm pretty pleased that a lot of that came out about like I thought, except for I look like an idiot in one big key way, which is that I completely overlooked Oregon in the discussion. Oregon had been sitting in the poll at number 7 previously, and I just completely forgot about them when I laid out where everybody was going. I was just, I guess, slotting in where the teams like Texas, Clemson, Notre Dame were going to fall in that top 10, but I just overlooked where to put Oregon. So your new top 10 is as predicted. Ohio State is number 1 and pretty significant lead. They claim 55 first place votes. Penn State is number 2 with 7 first place votes. LSU jumped to number 3 as predicted with 3 first place votes, and we did slide into that 4th spot. So we moved up 1 spot, although we lost our lone first place vote. I guess it moved over to one of those other schools. Miami did come up behind us to number 5. And then Oregon, as I mentioned, had been hanging out at 7, is now back up to 6. And then you start to slot in the losers from the first weekend, Texas, Clemson, and Notre Dame, all at 0 and 1 or 7, 8, and 9. And South Carolina, as predicted, did slide up into the 10th spot. So because I had forgotten about Oregon, that really didn't leave any room for Florida State to jump all the way into the top 25 or the top 10. And people, the voters were not as aggressive about Florida State as I thought they might be. And honestly, that would have been quite the jump. They already jumped from off the chart outside of the top 25 to 14 in this week's rankings. So a couple other notable things since we were just talking about Tennessee, they moved up 2 spots from number 22 to number 24, and Alabama fell from 8 all the way down to 21. So you might have thought that performance was bad enough. They just get kicked right out of the poll, but rarely are voters going to do that, and they are still an immensely talented team. So there's still a lot of opportunity for them to come back in line. For the Gator haters out there, and I have been remiss so far. This is our 5th or 6th podcast now, and I have yet to really emphasize Gator hating. So let's just be really clear that Gator hating is a priority around here. But for the Gator haters out there, it, it has been sort of fun to watch them just wander around in the weeds and be terrible. But I think the reality is we would all rather beat a really good, highly thought of Florida that'll make us look better, and we would rather beat a Florida that has hopes. Like every other fan base, they get too depressed when they're in the kind of place where they've been the last couple of years. So, maybe they'll hold on to the top 25 by the time we get to the end of October and we get to play them. But they had started out at 15 and they moved up to 13. And Michigan actually lost a spot, mostly just because Florida State had to go somewhere. So they fell from 14 to 15 for no real reason. And Oklahoma stayed at 18. Ole Miss moved up from 21 to 20. And Utah jumped into the poll after beating up UCLA over the weekend, and former Tennessee quarterback Nico. Again, I refuse to try and say his last name on air. That would be too embarrassing for me. But Indiana lost a spot. I guess the voters were not impressed that Old Dominion hung around for a while. I wasn't even sure people would pay attention to that, but apparently they did pay attention and noticed that Old Dominion kind of hung around with Indiana, so they fell down from 20 to 23. They didn't lose, but weren't super impressive. So you'll get a chance to read that. I'm sure you'll have your own thoughts, but there's your quick hitter on where we are in the poll and a couple thoughts about that. So Ohio State, Penn State, LSU, Georgia at number 4, Miami, Oregon, Texas, Clemson, Notre Dame, South Carolina. So I think to get back on track with what we're talking about, what are the potential contenders out there? And I guess we could expand this to talk about SEC contenders as well. But what are the potential contenders out there? That's the comparative we're using here, right? Is to say, okay, so what about, so Ohio State, obviously in the running, both for playoffs and a serious national championship contender, Penn State, LSU, Georgia. So, we're now sneaking a little higher up, although no first place votes. So just like we talked about, you can see that on talent and winning alone, people have us, in that mix and they expect us to be in the playoffs. But they're still looking at Ohio State, Penn State, LSU. And LSU, you might have felt good about watching Alabama crumble and fall at Florida State. Maybe you didn't. I'm not sure. Maybe you want to. Maybe you'd rather that they stayed top of the heap until we get a chance to beat them. You might have felt the same about Texas. The good news about Alabama and Texas is we were going to have the chance to make our statement against them. So my opinion is I always want to see teams be the highest and best ranked team they can be when we then beat them and claim the glory. So that's the fan perspective. I think that's the logical perspective as a fan too, to try to claim the most. You can always look at your enemies in combative football and rivalries and sports, silly sports rivalries, and you can say, well, you know, I just want to see them completely fall apart. Maybe. I would rather beat the really best version, you know. If Alabama really is a shell of themselves, I'm glad to know that we have a real strong chance of keeping our home winning streak alive. Maybe if Texas is really not as good as everybody thought they are, same thing. You know, we might get all the way through our season again this year and still be undefeated at home and take that home winning streak up into the 39-40 range going into next year and, you know, have a real shot at moving up in the record books in that. And that would be fun. And plus, I just want to win. You know, if we go undefeated, then, like I said, we're going to be a top candidate for a key spot in the playoff rankings, in a playoff seeding, and that's what we want. So hopefully that's a good opportunity. But I think that I would still rather beat elevated Alabama, elevated Texas. If I had that little bit of fear, that little bit of wonder, as this year's Georgia team, we talked about that. Hey, one of the advantages of not being just in reload default number one team mode like we had been the last couple of years, beast mode if you're a gamer. One of the downsides about um, one of the downsides about that mode is that you kind of just wait for the big games, wait for the championship, and there's not that excitement week to week. So earlier in one of the podcasts, I reflected on the idea that we should actually sort of revel in and be excited and enjoy the fact that we really don't know for sure if this team is a true contender or not. And it's going to be fun to watch that build. It's going to make these games that are coming up a little more exciting. In a way, I would look at the Alabama and Texas game. Part of me is relieved and says, well, okay, we should be able to beat those teams at home, or I certainly feel better about our chances of beating those teams at home. The other part of me is disappointed that they're not undefeated. And I was talking to folks about, speculating, you know, if Alabama was undefeated coming into the game, and I thought they would beat Florida State, and then I thought they would have the rest of their schedule was easy enough. They would be undefeated coming in the end of September. Game day would probably be looking at that as a game. Two SEC heavyweight foes who've been the top SEC teams the last couple of years. Yet again, a big clash on campus at Georgia, and game day would come to check it out. And maybe they still will. We'll see. But it's obviously lost a little bit of luster. Alabama's all the way down in the 20s now, and they're not going to have a lot of games that are going to really spice people up to jump way back up into the top 10, most likely. So that game doesn't have the luster that it might have. Texas has already lost. If Texas had gone undefeated all the way into November when they come to Sanford Stadium, again, another huge matchup. Might have had the opportunity to see game day show up on campus twice in one season, like they did a couple of years ago. And those teams losing probably takes a little bit of the luster off of that right now. I want to take a moment just comparatively, again, talking about these top teams to give some perspective on the point I'm going to close with for today, which is the reason we're looking at this, getting the perspective, doing the comparatives, is because again, we're gauging where are we as a championship team. And you can't just look, this team is not as dominant, and we've kind of talked about that some already, but this team is not as dominant as we saw in 21 and 22. Just like we talked about, you just couple, when referring to what the new style champion looks like and where is college football right now, you're probably not going to see teams be able to assemble that kind of talent that Alabama, Georgia, LSU teams of old were able to do anymore. The portal, the transfer, the need to play right away, the chance for kids to make NIL deals and look for money, and are just each team's ability to assign just payroll basically. I mean, just like any other team in pro sports now, you slot how much money goes to your quarterback, how much money goes to your line, how much money goes to your skill players. And every team's going to have a budget, and they're only going to be able to afford so many people. So you're not going to have a defensive line and front seven like we used to have, where you had three deep with NFL first through third rounders. You're just not going to be able to pay for it, even if you had that much enthusiasm. The reality from kids wanting to come to be at Georgia, the reality is they also are not just going to walk away from money if other schools are going to pay them. So if you run out of money because you paid the first string guy and the second string guy, that third string future NFL star, why would he stick around if he could get three times the money or money at all, somewhere else? So again, we're not going to build teams like that. So we're not looking to see Georgia become what Georgia was 3, 4 years ago. We're looking comparatively at the other teams around us and saying, how would we stack up today? And how do we think we might stack up, like I was talking about before, by the end of the season? As we build through the season, as Gunnar gets confidence and learns to do more and more things, with the keys in his hand to the offense, as Bobo hopefully gets more and more creative with him and says, hey, here's some special things that we can keep adding each week that I'm seeing that Gunnar can do, and he can take on more responsibility leading the offense. The team will grow and get better. Hopefully, the defense gets better and tighter, better communication, where they're just able to cover each other more and more and just even work harder as a group, shutting down opponents. I think you could see that, and you could see that kind of build. So we're looking at all these details to project ahead and say, where is this going to end up as we get towards the end of the season to the playoffs? And then what kind of team are we? Like we said, now you have a chance to build a team during the season that then goes into the second season, which is the playoff season. And, that can be a 4 game season that is, could mean everything to what you end up thinking about this team. So how we get in, how we rate, where we're seated, and what kind of chances we have of getting through that tournament at the end of the season once we get in depends a lot on what the other teams look like and what we have to do to beat them and how do we match up against them. So I want to go back and talk about Texas Ohio State. I watched that game because it was before our game, so I had the opportunity to put in that time before just investing in the Georgia game. And I was not super impressed that either team struck me as number one. So I'm not surprised, like I said, that Ohio State just got installed as the new number one and collected. I know the Ohio State um, hype is there. And like I said, now there's this perception. I hear people saying that Ohio State's the new bully. And by bully, they mean not just a team that won the national championship, but the team that can go out and beat the other top teams. And people are looking at this right now and they're saying, see, Ohio State went on a run, they plowed through the playoffs, they beat some really good teams, and they did. Give them credit. Then they have Texas come to their place. Texas has got all the hype. They're ranked number one. They appear to have more coming back because Ohio State lost so much, even though they're defending national champion. What does Ohio State do? They come in and they beat Texas, and they didn't beat them resoundingly, but they did make them look bad, So even though it was only a one-score game, and Texas didn't look good, and everybody's lost a lot of faith in them. And now you say, oh, Ohio State's the bully. The bully is the team that can beat those ranked teams, that just consistently knows how to win the big game and take down the other higher ranked teams. Just for some perspective, I'm gonna say, I think Ohio State definitely last year and to start this year, and I'm not including this year, just the last 3 years, I've looked at, well, what's their record in games against top 25 teams? Because that's part of that bully mentality, right? What do you do just beating the other elite teams? After a 6-1 run last year, 4 of those games being in the playoffs, Ohio State is 10-5 coming into this season in their last 15 games, 10-5 in the last 3 seasons against top 25 teams. Texas is 7-8 in that same time span. They were 2-3 last year, 4-2 the year before, and 1-3 against ranked teams. And of course, last year they lost twice to us as a ranked team, and then of course they lost to Ohio State. So the 2 wins that they had, they beat Clemson, they beat Arizona State in the playoffs, and those are solid wins. But I think everybody thought that Texas was on a different level than those teams. Those are teams that would never have been in a playoff, in a smaller playoff, and certainly not in the 4 team playoff. And those were not teams that people looked at and thought, even though Clemson resurrected their season after the beatdown we gave them to start the year and snuck into the playoff, they were the lowest rated team in the playoff. And they snuck in because of what happened on the field in other games more than what happened with them. They closed the season by losing to South Carolina again. So, when that happened, nobody thought they were going to make the playoff. But the way things worked out, they snuck in. They had a pretty good end of their season. They had a nice win total, but in reality, they didn't beat anybody important either. So Texas always looked like a team that should beat them, and they did. So, but the idea of Texas being back or Texas being a bully, definitely not there when you look at a 7-8 record, and now you can add another loss to that they just took last week. You can give Ohio State credit for their win and say, okay, they're 11-5 now in their last 16 games against top 25 teams. By comparison, where's Georgia sit? Georgia's 15-4 in the last 3 seasons coming into this year. And of course, we didn't play a ranked team yet this year. So Georgia's 15-4 in their last 19 games against top 25 teams. So two things jump out at you there. That's a significantly better record than both of those teams. So I would argue Georgia is still the bully, regardless of what people think about us right now. But, we'll see how we perform as the season goes and we play Tennessee in 2 weeks. They'll be a top 25 team. They're not going to lose to East Tennessee State University, I don't think, at home this week. So we'll get the opportunity to get another win potentially on the road against a top 25 team. But um, 15-4, the other thing that jumps out at you, that's nine. Again, we keep talking about schedule. That's 19 games in the last 3 seasons against top 25 opponents. Ohio State is there with 16, so they're just behind. But they did rack up. It's worth noting they had Texas on the schedule this year. Congrats to them for being willing to schedule a tough opponent like that. But without their playoff run, or had they been left out of the playoffs because they missed being in the 14 playoff, they would have been left out. Let's face it, they would not have made it because they lost their conference championship game and they were just on the outside looking in. Same thing that happened to us 2 seasons ago against Alabama. We lost we went 12-0 in the regular season, had been the number one team in the country, lost to Alabama, and they took our spot. That's a conversation for another podcast too. That's a little bit retrospective, looking back. The longer I get away from that, the less I get comfortable with it, honestly. But we'll come back to that a different day. I'm just wanting to point out that Ohio State's run in the playoff made a big difference. I mean, again, they were crowned national champion and they had 4 wins against top 25 opponents. So without that run, had it just still been a 14 playoff, then they would have come into this season 6-5 in their last 3 seasons in top 25 games. And then, who knows where the game goes this year. So I don't know if I'm ready to crown Ohio State the bully. And like I said, when I watched that game, I wasn't super impressed with either team. I thought both offenses were not very dynamic and did not look very impressive. They didn't scare me. So I'm not surprised that the defenses were ahead of them as far as development and how they played. And because they're so incomplete, especially Ohio State. Look, Ohio State won the game. So again, that's the name of the game, right? That's what you're supposed to do. Win the game first and foremost. But they might have had one of the uglier wins on paper you're ever going to see. I looked at this stat. I thought it was interesting. They put up the least yardage of any team in FBS to win a game in this last weekend. Out of 134 teams, um, they were the worst. So, oh no, I take that back. I said that wrong. They were 131st out of 134 teams in total offense. Oh, that's out of all teams, but they were the worst of all the teams that won. About 90 teams won, and they were the worst winner. So they only had 203 yards of total offense. Their new quarterback, Justin Sayan, went 13 of 20 for 126 yards, and they had 77 yards rushing. They were really terrible on offense, and they really, in many ways, were very lucky to win that game. And I also am going to blame Sark a little bit. I mean, I don't know how I would feel about Sark as my coach if I was Texas. Let's put it this way: I am much happier that we have Kirby Smart. It's one of those things. I play this game sometimes mentally, where you look at other teams, and you say, "Would I trade my guy for that guy?" Or how do I feel about my roster when I compare down the line? I can definitely look at the coaching thing, and look, anybody would have taken Nick Saban over just about anybody, right? I mean, he absolutely was the GOAT. But Kirby has done an amazing job, and is definitely one of the best modern coaches we've seen in a long time. It's too early to write his place in history, but he's already got 2 national championships, 3 SEC championships, and he's been to that national championship game now three times. So in the playoff era, that's impressive. But I don't know about Sark. I mean, again, the record I just set out there, Texas is now 7-8 and actually 7-9 after the loss last week in their last three seasons and this one game this year against top 25 teams. That's not very impressive. They did outgain Ohio State in the game. They put up 336 yards of offense. But where I was going with the questioning about Sark, they went for it five times on fourth down, got it once, and missed on four, including when you watch the game, twice inside the 10-yard line, once at the one and once at the nine. They went for it on fourth down rather than take the gimme field goal. And in the end, Texas on their last drive, the last time they touched the ball in the game, down one score, they made it to midfield and ended up in 4th and 5, and of course had to go for it then and failed on the play. And so they turned the ball over at midfield, and Ohio State ran out the clock with about a minute and 27 seconds to go. So that it's hard to take a revisionist point of view and look at that and say, without doubt, Texas would have won the game if they were, not a touchdown down, but a field goal down. But I do think, had they kicked the two field goals when they were inside the 10, and as much as that feels, I mean, at the first one, the game was 7-0, and it was the third quarter, and they hadn't scored, and they were only down to one score. And you're going to have to score twice anyway to win the game, right? I mean, you can't, and it's middle of the third quarter. So you're not thinking, well, let's tie the game up and go to overtime. You can't possibly think that way in the middle of the third quarter. So I think kicking the field goal, taking the momentum, and then hoping you get the ball back, come down, put a touchdown on the board, and take a lead, and now you're up 10-7. That seems a whole lot smarter than that, machismo move to go for it from the 1 yard line and fail. And I understand you left Ohio State there on the 1 yard line, but that didn't work out either. You didn't get the safety, you didn't get the ball, right back and score right away. So, but then later they did get the score late. In the fourth quarter they came alive a little bit. They got the score, and they yet again now down 14-7. They again go for it on fourth down instead of kicking the field goal. Again, you're going to have to tie this game up, or I mean, you've got enough time at that point in the game to think that you might get the ball back, and now a touchdown would get you out of there with a win. And overtime is a crapshoot, right? So if you're just playing to get to overtime and wasting your scoring chances like that, my personal opinion is, look, there's a lot of times I'm very much behind going for it on fourth down, and I definitely hate seeing coaches punt the ball from the 40 when the ball usually is going to end up in the end zone for a touchback and you netted 20 yards. And statistics argue strongly that you should go for it in that case, that you're better off trying to possess the ball than you are gaining 20 yards. So there's a lot of times to go for it on fourth down. But in a game where the other team isn't even mustering 200 yards of offense and is not going to score but twice themselves, giving away scores, chipping away at the lead, getting some confidence, building some momentum, giving your team some hope, putting points on the board with the field goal, I think it would have made a big difference. It just would have been interesting. I just got to feel like Ohio State fans and Ohio State coaches and Ohio State players would have felt a lot different if, when Texas had the ball the last time, instead of trying to drive the length of the field to get a touchdown to hopefully tie the game when they've done nothing all game, what if it was 14-13? And if Texas gets past the 50, now you're just in desperate fear that they're going to get a walk-off field goal. And you play different. You play different when you're on defense. You coach different. Everybody feels that tightening, that clenching up, because the game is seriously in doubt. The way the game flowed during that game, it felt like Texas had a million miles to go, even though one touchdown would have tied the game. So I think there's a lot to be said, not just about what happened with Arch Manning, but what happened with Sark and his coaching decisions during that game. Either way, neither team really looked like the number one team in the country to me. So I think there's a lot of overhype right now about Ohio State. They are still the team that earned a third place based on talent. They have a lot of talent. They have gotten over the hump about winning some big games, but they lost 14 players, into the draft and a lot of other guys, and they're just not the same team. And yeah, defense looked great, but I'm not convinced yet that that's the same defense we saw last year. And thus far, their offense looked very undynamic. And same with Texas. Another problem for Texas, we said coming into the season, they were a little bit questionable at number one because they lost like four guys off the offensive line. And lo and behold, Arch was under pressure a lot of the time, and which, made him rush his throws, bounce a few of them, not on target. He obviously didn't have a lot of confidence. Not to mention I mean, it's just one game, but we know the last couple years, they've lost guys each year to the pros out of their receiving core and their tight end, their receiving room, and that happened again last year. They had a couple NFL guys the year before that moved on, and I just didn't see anybody dynamic, anybody getting open, anybody making plays in the wide receivers and downfield for Arch. So again, I'm not trying to make excuses for them, but I don't know that they have the dynamic kind of offense to really look at them as a team that's going to bounce back and really just go move up and down the field against good defenses. So, I think that's something to consider. So, um, where does that leave us? Well, I guess the final comparison there is when you look at these teams and you look at what Gunner did and how we broke down Gunner. We talked about the Gunner and the Arch comparisons before. You looked at what our defense did and how they did play with passion and energy and how they did put up a wall, yes, against Marshall. We'll keep seeing how they progress, but right now it's off to a good start. Look, another perspective that I want to share, one of the things I thought was really amazing or interesting about this amazing opening weekend where we had three matchups of top 10 teams, none of these matchups produced any real big points or offense. I mean, offense just seemed to disappear. The Notre Dame Miami game was the only game where people got in the 20s. The final score was 27-24 Notre Dame. And it was one of the only games where both teams put up over 300 yards of offense, but still not a ton. I mean, they didn't exactly blow away. Miami had 332 yards offense, Notre Dame 315. The LSU Clemson game, LSU put up 354 yards of offense and possessed the ball a lot against Clemson only having 261 yards of offense. That was the game between two also maybe Heisman front runners behind Arch because Nussmeier and Cade Klubnik for Clemson, the LSU quarterback and the Clemson quarterback, are both veterans. They've been there 2 or 3 years in the systems, and they put up a lot of yards in the past. 4,000 yards a season just about from each of those guys. But they could not even get their teams to 400 yards of offense in those games. Texas, Ohio State, again, 336 for Texas, 203 for Ohio State. Score there was 14-7. The LSU Clemson game was 17-10. The Miami game was a respectable 27-24. But none of these teams cracked the 30s. The average score from these big matchups is like 19-14 when you look at it. And the average yardage across all six teams, 300 yards a game. I mean, yes, it's not surprising. They've got good defenses, but these are teams that have put up some serious offense in the last 5 or 6 years. And these are the top teams that we're looking at in the country as national title contenders. Six of them for sure, right there. And none of them really were able to put up any significant offense. It was all defense. And that feels like a big reversal from where football has been over the last 5 or 6 years. Feels like it's been all about offense and quarterbacks and dynamic wide receivers and Heisman Trophy winners. And I just think it was an interesting commentary. I don't know what it means yet, but in the big picture, what it means is look, we expected our defense to be great again this year at Georgia. I mean, it was not what it had been the previous years, but even last year it wasn't bad. It was still a top 25, top 30 defense. And we were expecting or hoping and thinking it might get better if they play with the right energy and passion and they lock down the line, play well in the front seven. They may go back to being what we're used to in Georgia football. And the early returns from the one game against an overmatched opponent looked decent. Gunner looked in command of the offense. So I guess the point I'm getting at there is look, when we're comparing to these other national title contending playoff teams, possible playoff teams, right now, it's not like you have to look at Gunner and say, well, gosh, I don't know if this is a guy who can lead us to 45 points a game, and that's what it's going to take to beat an Alabama or, a Texas or an Ohio State. And the answer is actually right now, it looks like all these teams, Clemson, LSU, Notre Dame, they're all playing defense and grinding out points. And right now, that's what our team looks like too, is a team that can play some really excellent defense. And, Gunner may or may not turn out to be a super dynamic quarterback, but at the moment, he looks like a guy who can get some first downs and help us grind out points. So I think from a comparative point of view, you can take where we are right now, the status after one game with us and all these other teams, and say, I think we're in the mix. I think we've got the tools that it's going to take to compete with these other teams once you get into the playoffs. We're going to have an opportunity to build and strengthen over the season and see Gunner grow and the rest of this team grow. Hopefully, the defense actually continues to get better and better. We'll see what the other teams do also, but again, we're taking what everybody offered on this first time, this first outing, and yeah, we didn't play the same kind of competition, but I see in what we have right now at Georgia, I feel stronger that we are a contender than I did with any optimism coming into the season, because not just what we did, I'm still cautiously optimistic about what we did, not elated, but I see the tools there to match up with what these other teams are doing as well. So that's where we'll end for today. Thank you for listening, and I hope you'll join us tomorrow for the Daily Dog podcast. We'll start getting into Austin Peay and who they are and what we want to do and what we want to see happen. What's our checklist for the game coming up next week? I hope that if you're enjoying this too, you'll be passing it on to other dog fans or other college football fans. While we are primarily focused on dog fans, we want to have a conversation with anybody who wants to talk college football and sports in general, who might have an interest in this. Also, I hope that you take a moment, if you're interested, to share some comments. You can put comments down at the same page the podcast is on in the comments section. You could send me an email through Substack. You could also direct message me through Substack or join the chat conversation that I have going, which is open and free to all subscribers at the moment, and subscriptions are free. But I hope you'll take a moment and think about joining us conversationally. I'd like to get some comments in, and when I do get comments from folks, I plan to incorporate them into the podcast. If you have a question, if you have something you'd like me to talk about, some way to address it, please put at least a first name or a last name or initial. Tell me where you're from, and until then, until I hear from more of you, the best I can say is go Dogs.